Tonight we discussed going against the tide, being modest. Why and how, and what's our takeaway? All right, so let's get started. So we were going, unless someone has another question, because I know we spent like 3 weeks already on the idea of idolatry, and we raised a lot of very relevant, pertinent issues, especially timely. So any questions on anything has come up over the last week? Or if not, we're going to move on to another topic.
Mine would be, and I'm not caught up, but I will get caught up, would be for maybe another day. Like, our adventure is now that mother-in-law is living with us. And she's not particularly religious, but she also does like to do some of those things. We're finding the balance. So maybe another day we can cover that. Maybe
you have to, I mean, you obviously have to do whatever in that situation, means finding the balance. But definitely, what you want to do is explain to her, especially if she's not particularly religious and it's really cultural, explain which things are really, if you want to say, offensive to you, or something you don't want, maybe better to say you don't want your children exposed to, or you don't want that energy in your house. You have to find the words that are going to work in her lexicon of what she'd say, oh, okay, I understand. And then you wouldn't want anything, that's really connected to Christian worship, if she's a Christian. I mean, to any other worship, if she's someone else. I mean, like, ideally, you don't want any of that in your house. It's a horrible energy. You don't want any of that in your house. If she insists on something, then you could tell us what, then I could tell you if it's okay. Perhaps you could ask her to keep it in her room, or not okay. In terms of Christelle's question, of course, we all have that, myself included, this time of year. People say, Merry whatever, and you just don't respond. And being a person like me, it feels so rude when they're just being polite or nice. But yes, you definitely cannot wish someone have a good holiday, enjoy your holiday weekend. Even if you say your holiday weekend, you absolutely can't do that, because that's acknowledging it, that's affirming it. So really is not, you really can't respond to that greeting besides sort of to nod, whatever, just sort of look blank, look like you were spaced out and didn't really hear, or something along those lines, or just say, okay, God, if you want me to look rude, that's that, I'm serving you. But definitely cannot respond, absolutely, and definitely cannot say anything along the lines of implying like, enjoy your holiday, have a nice holiday, something like that. Now, if someone has a 2-week vacation from work, you could say, enjoy your vacation, because it's 2 weeks off. It's a week off. Enjoy your vacation. You could say, enjoy the weekend off from work, if you feel you have to say something, because that's just saying, oh, you're off from work. Cool. But you can't say anything that will give credence to it. It's very relevant and comes up for all of us now. Anyone else? What about enjoy your family? Enjoy your family. I don't know, because if you mean like, oh, they're going to their children or their grandparents to celebrate the holiday, it's
So don't say a thing. I normally say, well, they text me. They know, all of them, that I do not celebrate, but they text me, and then I just answer, well, enjoy your kids and your family. But I never mention any holidays or.
Okay. I mean, everyone sort of has to.
I stay away from the holiday thing.
Right, totally off. Well, enjoy being with your kids, enjoy being with your parents. I guess, definitely better than anything that gives credence. In other words, again, just to.
I do not imply anything about the festivity that they celebrating. And I try to. Normally, I will say, nothing. As you said, not answer at all.
The best. That's what yes. I do. I just don't answer.
I know.
And I'm a polite person, so it always feels rude. But I'm just like,
yeah.
Don't answer. I'm a polite person. So, I put God first.
Okay. In our Facebook and other social media, people posting pictures where there's a tree or something in the background and they say like happy holidays or any general statement, not specific, is it okay to like that post?
No.
Or
No,
okay.
Absolutely not.
Okay. I think that's very relevant.
With the tree and says happy holidays, you definitely cannot like that post.
Okay.
Again,
I think that's very relevant.
As we mentioned last week, we discussed this last night, from about 4:30 to 11:30, we were not allowed to study Torah. 4:30, 5:30, 6:30, 7:30, 8:30, 9:30, 10:30, 11:30, that's 7 hours. Right. We did not study Torah. Could you imagine what that means when a world of Jewry stops studying Torah for 7 hours? Because it has such a power that we cannot feed. And if we have to again, obviously we still serve God, we still keep kosher. It was part of the time was a Sabbath. Of course, we still kept the Sabbath. Of course, we prayed the evening prayer, but we don't study Torah because Torah gives energy. And we can't put out any energy in such a critical time where evil has such a power. Well, obviously, any innocuous thing you're doing is not innocuous at all. It's feeding into that energy. It's acknowledging that energy. It's giving it credence, which means it's giving it power, which means it's giving it your power. And your power as a Noahide is huge. Maybe nobody around you seems to recognize how important people you are, but you're huge people. So you have to be very, very careful. And yes, definitely not to like a post that says happy holidays, even if there wasn't a picture of a tree in the background, just a happy holidays. You know what holiday they're referring to. So no, 100% no, absolutely. And Natalie, you'll let me know the specific details of your mother-in-law's situation and try to maybe discuss with your husband the best lines to explain it to her. But obviously that's challenging if you have someone in your house and it's a parent, someone you have to obviously respect. Then you can't just say, these are the rules in my house. Obviously you're not going to say that. But at the same time, you don't want to bring that into your house. You don't want that evil in your house. You don't want to be affected by it. You don't want your children to be affected by it. You don't want her to be affected by it either. Obviously you don't want
Yeah, like I said, we're figuring it out. Like, she had invited us to the solstice service, which we did not go to. But then yesterday and today, she wanted to make some of the foods that she grew up with, but she didn't decorate, we didn't do anything. She just kind of wanted to, like I said, make the foods that she grew up with. So to me, and we didn't even acknowledge the day all day. She was actually very careful about trying to not say the word Christmas for the last couple of days. So I think it's, like I said, we're finding a balance.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. That shows a lot of respect, because she would say it's not religious. I don't mean anything religious by it. I'm not religious. It's just my culture. And we said, yeah, but it's a culture that has a lot of evil attached to it. And we don't want it around in our house. So that's great. That's wonderful that she was so respectful. And it's a learning curve, obviously. So what we were going to talk about today, after that introduction, very timely introduction, and as Danielle said, spiritually, this is the last night of Hanukkah, which is the most powerful night of Hanukkah. Obviously, every night of Hanukkah, every day of Hanukkah has enormous power. And I keep telling God, I know he's doing miracles. I can't wait till I get to see them, but I know they're unfolding. But tonight is the most powerful night, and I definitely prayed by the candles tonight for all the things that I want, because this is a really, really, really powerful night. So it's a wonderful night to have this class, because I'm sure the energy of tonight is really going to help our class and help us all absorb the messages that we're trying to discuss. So I wanted to speak about modesty, which we've intermittently over the years discussed, of course, but it's been a few years. And it's really something that I think as Noahides, as women, it's always something that's critical, and therefore, probably for that reason, we struggle with. Obviously, things that are important are usually challenging. It sort of goes hand in hand. So we have important and challenging gift of laws to the woman of being modest. And laws of modesty are applicable to Noahide women course, not as stringently as to Jewish women, but there are many laws of modesty that are very, very relevant to all Noahide women. And because they're very relevant and very important, as I said, we could be very challenged. And that's sort of how things work. The more important it is, the more we have challenges. So if you're saying, oh, I don't go there, or oh, yeah, I'm not up to that yet, or I sort of put that on the back burner, well, yeah, there's a reason why. Not because it's not important, because it's really important. And that's why it's really challenging. So just a few general sort of like introductory ideas, then we'll speak about some laws, and then we'll speak about how this relates to the Noahide specifically. So there's a concept. Of course, modesty is something, and modesty can be on many levels. When we're going to be discussing modesty, we mean modesty in dress. There's, of course, modesty in speech. There's modesty in thought. But as we speak modestly and dress modestly, a very big goal is that it should change us on the inside. It says that from our actions comes our heart. After the actions is impacted the heart. So as we do things and speak specifically in a very modest fashion, this really changes and refines what's going on inside. That does, now, of course, if it didn't refine the inside, still God wants you to be modest. Or if you say conversely, I'm so refined on the inside, I don't need any of these laws. Still, God wants you to be modest. But it is important to recognize that as one dresses more modestly and is conscious to speak more modestly, more discreetly, more refined, there is an inner shift. Has anyone here like sort of seen that in themselves? That as they made choices, perhaps in what they screened in their thoughts or in their speech or in their dress or in their actions, also modesty in action, they actually saw a change in themselves?
I'll share. When I was in the Army, let's just say that my speech was could have used some.
I laugh because I can relate. Yeah.
So like now, like it seems so foreign to me to speak, with certain, like certain words and stuff like that. And it's just so crazy because at one point they would just flow right out of my mouth, with no worries. And now it's just like, even to hear them, I'm just like clutching my pearls, it's so funny.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And you're saying it wasn't a conscious choice for you it was conscious for you to refine your speech? Or as you changed other things, the speech naturally changed?
I think the speech kind of naturally changed. And then too, like with having children, it was kind of like, I don't know, that changed my vocabulary too.
I agree. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Because speech is really hard to change unless there's a concerted effort, because you're not thinking, oh, I want to say these horrible words. It's just sort of what's in your brain. So it just comes out of your mouth. Especially if you're hearing it, it's just continuously hearing something just means it's so natural. It's in your thoughts. It's very natural for it to come out on your lips.
I really think it comes from your soul. Like what you say and what you think is really coming from your soul. So as you refine that, it just naturally happens. I have seen that in myself. I've seen that in other people. Very much so.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. That is really beautiful. And it's beautiful to reach the point, as Christelle said, that like, ooh, those words are so like, ow, oh my gosh, offensive. Like, as versus, yeah, that's normal, but I don't do it. No, those are offensive, and they should offend. They should feel like, ow. And it's beautiful to say, hey, I used to talk like that. And now it's hurtful to hear it. Wow. We have two people here saying the same thing. So there's very strong testimony that it really, really works. This is a basic principle in religious thought. After the actions comes the inner reality. Sort of like in psychology, it's sort of the opposite. And people like try to, let's say Freudian psychology, you're working on your inner world to affect your outer world. But in Jewish thought, in traditional Jewish thought, as we change the outer world, the inner world is changed. The inner world is affected. And it's so beautiful to see that two people really saw that. So we're speaking about modesty in general, and of course, that modesty for a Noahide. So in the the source for modesty is from Deuteronomy, where it's actually talking, Christelle's just talking about soldiers, so it's talking about soldiers. It's talking about soldiers going out to fight. And what's the source for modesty? We're not talking about women, we're talking about men. The verse says, a shovel should be among your equipment. That is a source for modesty. Now, why is talking to soldiers and saying to have a shovel in your equipment the source of modesty? Because the soldiers are going out. They're in the great outdoors, traveling, camping, fighting. Every soldier is required to have a personal shovel among all his other accoutrements. So if there's excrement, he can dig and he can cover it. That's modesty. We're not animals, we're humans. And we treat our waste products in a way that expresses our modesty and our refinement. Why? Because God is in your camp. God is in your camp. And seeing this is going to turn him away. So we see here that we need a level of morality, of modesty, of dignity to allow God to feel welcome and not driven away. Just like all other laws, there's the biblical verse, and there's much discussion in the rabbis, in the early sources and the later sources. There's three broad areas where we derive the laws of modesty. We have a perspective. So the general perspective is, before we get into anything technical, we're not going to do too much technical, of course, just as it pertains to the Noahide. But the general perspective is the sanctity of the home, the foundation of our life, is maintained primarily through the laws of modesty. It creates an atmosphere of holiness. It creates an atmosphere of wholesomeness that permeates the family life. And these laws are so important that in certain situations, a man is actually required to divorce his wife if she insists on disobeying these laws. Meaning, if she's not going to comply, like, you can't be married to her, because what's your life going to be like? What's your home going to be like? It's very interesting. It says in the Midrash in Genesis, when God is creating Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava. So it says in the Torah, in the verse, that God built the rib that he took from man and fashioned it into a woman. So the Hebrew built also could mean considered, thought. It's the same word. The same word translates into either he built it or he considered it, he thought it. So it says in the Midrash that this word he built, meaning he considered, God was, so to speak, considering from what part of Adam's body should he build Chava, should he build Eve, his wife? He said, not from the head, then she's going to become really swell-headed. Not from the eyes, she's going to be a little too flirtatious, but from the modest part of man, that even when he stands naked, that part is covered. So when God is forming us, the prototype woman, the mother of all living beings, Eve, Chava, God is thinking, so to speak, obviously he knew, but he's sharing this process for us to understand. The most essential quality in a woman is her modesty. It says, and as he from this rib formed her whole body, it says, from each limb he said, be a modest woman. Be a modest woman. Be a modest woman. So it's very interesting because obviously, growing up in our society, there's about, I'd say about zero in our society that helps you in this. And there's a lot that hurts you. And it's really something that's very underappreciated and not really considered of this is the essence of how God fashioned woman. The woman who was the mother of all humans, was fashioned that on every single one of her limbs, God said, be modest, be modest, be modest. showing how enormously significant this is. Now, in the laws, there's two sort of broad sources for the laws. Again, I don't want to really go too deeply into the laws unless someone's interested. There's what we call Da'as Moshe, which means the guidelines directly from Torah. And what's called Da'as Yehudis, the accepted standard of modest dress, which is completely binding. It's not like optional, it's completely binding. So there are guidelines directly from the Torah, like, for example, that a modest woman has to cover her, a married woman, has to cover her hair. And there's the accepted standard of modest dress in the Jewish community, standards that were adopted by observant Jewish women that have actually assumed the status of law. This is very unique for modesty. No other commandment is dependent on human decision. It's very unusual. God didn't say, well, we're going to rely on your innate sense of kosher to decide what food is kosher or not. We're going to rely on your innate sense of the Sabbath to determine what we can and can't do on the Sabbath. But God said, I created woman with an innate sense of modesty. That's the created woman. So I can rely on you to express that in your dress and your demeanor. Now, some of those laws vary by place, by era. What was accepted in Spain 1,000 years ago is different than what was in Poland 600 years ago. Even now, there could be slight variations in places, but certain basic rules never change. They're explicitly mentioned in the Talmud, for example, not uncovering the thigh. That's a rule recorded in the Talmud. Obviously, it's non-subjective. And then other aspects are not spelled out in the early sources, even though they were done, because it wasn't needed to say them. For most of history, women knew how to dress and act modestly. They knew it was appropriate and they dressed appropriately. It wasn't their biggest challenge, though it might be ours. Who here would view this as their biggest challenge in following God's laws to dress modestly? Anyone?
Finding the balance between dressing modestly, what I would love to wear that I saw in Israel, and still looking professional in my job, balancing all of those things.
So you're saying you saw a lot of like hippie-ish things that you thought were so beautiful, but they wouldn't really pass.
Exactly. Yeah. And like, not only would they not pass, they wouldn't be very practical when I have to put on the clean suit, the whole 9 yards, but like the way that they dress in the settlements, I would love to wear that all the time. I loved dressing that way when we were there.
Anyone else? Anyone finds it challenging, the laws of modesty?
I'm going to say my biggest challenge is during like going to the beach and stuff like that. Like I wear the shorts and like the long sleeve shirts and stuff, but like finding anything like, like, and I don't know where to shop, I think is the basic line for that. Cause I'm sure that there's stuff out there, and I've looked up stuff like modest bathing suits, but it's like, I don't really know what to buy or where to go for it.
So what some women do for swimming is they have shirts and skirts that are like swimming shirts, and like not exactly swim material, but material that you're meant to go in the water with. It's like, again, you sort of have to decide yourself, do you feel modest in it? Because in essence, when you're going in the water with clothing, it sort of clings to your body. So there are a lot of men around. I don't think it would be modest no matter what. But if there's not really so many around, they're far from you, but you don't want to be dressed in a way that your skin is exposed. They do sell them. I forget exactly what they call them because I never bought one, but I could definitely find out because, my daughter definitely would know, and I will post it up. But that definitely will be a challenge if you're used to going to the beach and then suddenly, like, you sort of know God wouldn't want you to be going on a bathing suit in the beach with men around, which he definitely would not. But you want to go swimming. So what are you supposed to do? And definitely, in essence, what an Orthodox woman do is going in some version of clothing, which you can't really swim the same way, but it sort of works. But then you sort of want to wear clothing that's not clinging and not form-fitting. It has to be the right material. So it's sort of like experimenting until you really come up with something that works for the water and works for not making you feel even more conspicuous and observed and your body exposed. But that definitely will be a challenge. That definitely sounds like a challenging area. Anyone else?
Oh, sorry. I did have one more thing, if I could ask. Having a male, child in your house, and I'm just gonna like making sure that you're appropriately dressed, obviously in front of your kid at all times. But, like to the extent, like, I worry. Like to the extent, like, I'm like, oh my gosh, I should wear a bra all day. Or, I don't know. I just, and my son's starting to get older and stuff. So it's like, it's more in the forefront of my mind,
How
like,
old is he?
He is 9.
Yeah, that's old enough. The easy guide to see is when the sages prohibited a touch. And the ages of prohibition of a touch between the genders is a girl age 3 and a boy age 9. So at that point, touch is already prohibited. Which would include.
Can you explain that?
Yeah.
Please.
It's prohibited for a man and woman to touch on any level, unless, of course, they're married or it's a parent, grandparent, great-grandparent, or son, grandson, great-grandson. So unless it's that direct family line going up, parent, grandparent, great-grandparent, or going down, child, grandchild, great-grandchild, it's a prohibition. You can't touch another person. It's just, no, we don't touch a man doesn't touch a woman. So at what age does that start? In other words, Jewish law, when there's an obligation of the law, start at the bar or bat mitzvah, which means for a boy 13, for a girl 12. But this prohibition of touch starts much younger. So once a boy is 9, the sages say, no, we got to be careful. So a boy under 9, we'd say, is still a child in his physical development, and so we assume it's safe. But once he's 9, we say, no, it might be safe, but it might not be safe. So once a boy is 9, it's like, no more touch of a girl. A girl of what age? A baby? A 9-year-old boy can't pick up a baby and carry the baby. Once a girl is 3, 3-year-old girl and a 9-year-old boy. 3 or any age older girl, and 9 or any age older boy. So knowing that, I would definitely say once a boy is 9, yes, there's definitely could be an awareness, could be other levels of what's going on. Their body could be impacting them. And therefore, yes, as the woman around, you'd want to be modest in front of your son. Absolutely. That there just shouldn't be anything going on in his head that you wouldn't want to be there. Absolutely. And there's also, of course, besides, the issue Christelle just raised, there's also the issue of being an example. You want to educate your children to be modest. Education begins from the womb. So even a child who's much younger than 9, you want to always be modest in a way that you're just giving them that as a gift. Just like if in your house there's always hospitality, then your children are naturally hospitable. They don't have to work on it. If there's always generosity to the poor, they're naturally generous. They don't think about it. You gave it to them as a free gift. So if in this house there's always modesty in what we watch, modesty in what we say, modesty in the things we discuss, modesty in how we discuss it, modesty in how we dress. If that's the norm in our house, even though for sure in your children's worlds, once they leave the enclave, the womb of the home, that's not the world they're going to see. But if this is how they're raised, God willing, that should be their norm. And that should always be, even if at some point they deviate from there, that should always be what they should come back to, because those are their roots. So you definitely want to be modest. If you already have male 9-year-old boys around, you definitely want to be modest to give all your children the gift that that's their norm. And you want to be modest to keep God in your home. Just as we're saying that the source for modesty is the soldiers covering their excrement, not to chase God away. So this very much impacts bringing God in and allowing God to feel, I'm welcomed. This is a modest environment. This is a refined place. This is a place where I'm welcome. And if it's not, in speech, in dress, and what's being discussed and what's being read and what's being watched, it's like, I was like, I guess I wasn't really invited to this place. So it's definitely. And as I'm saying, in earlier times, it was so axiomatic Like a lot of it didn't have to be discussed and shown the sources. It was just the norm. But unfortunately, in our world, it's the opposite. And that's why it's really something that we have to really focus on, because it's not normal. It's not the norm. Anywhere your children will be, it's not the norm, except you can make it the norm in your home. Now, another aspect is beyond the laws in these two dimensions, there's also the idea of where you live and what's considered modest. If something, even if it's not a law, but if all women adhere to this, then it would be considered immodest to be different than everyone else. And therefore, in that place, I mean, like just an example, I know it's not relevant to anyone's life, but just to understand the point I'm trying to make. In some places, there are still some areas among certain groups of Orthodox Jews where it would be considered not modest for a woman to drive. Now, in the general world of Orthodox Jewry, it's not considered a problem and women drive. But in that area, it would actually be considered a problem, because if everyone else is viewing it as immodest, and if no woman does it because it's immodest, if you're doing it, it's immodest. So again, you could take that model and think, is there anything like that in your area? Probably not. But that's just another area which just shows how careful we have to be in modesty. Now, again, there's specific sources. It goes back to the Mishnah and the Talmud, where it discusses the Jewish women not weaving in the marketplace, where it was considered sort of like a lax, coarse thing to weave in the marketplace. Why? Because when you're weaving, you're picking up and down your arms, and then your upper arms are exposed in public. And there's a lot of discussion around this idea. You could say, oh my gosh, this is what the Talmud is discussing, if a woman's arms are exposed. But yeah, it's that important. It's that important to know. Is it possible? Is it not possible? What do you do if it happens? Because we so care. We're so careful about modesty. It's so significant. And therefore, it's considered a serious transgression to dress immodestly for many reasons. Not to tempt a man, as we were just discussing, not to cause God's presence to depart, as we were saying, not to violate Torah. So if someone's not modest, they're violating the laws of Torah. They're causing others to transgress, and they're causing God's presence to depart. So this is a lot of heavy duty stuff, and it shows us how significant it is. So what has to be covered? And again, this is for a Noahide woman, a Jewish woman. It's considered the exact same in this. The neck, below and including the collarbone. The arms, the upper arms, including the elbow. I'm the model here demonstrating. The legs, well, the thighs, including the knees. Now, a Jewish woman is required to wear a dress. A Noahide woman can wear pants if that's accepted in the area, as long as they're not form-fitting pants. Though it's considered more pious to wear a dress, but they can wear pants. But obviously the dress or the pants have to be long enough to cover the knees when you're standing, when you're sitting, even if you're, wearing something else. So there goes the shorts, because that would definitely not be considered modest. Most say there's need to cover the legs entirely, at least to wear stockings or something on the legs. And a married woman, a Jewish married woman, is forbidden from the Torah, it's actually sourced in the Torah, to have her hair uncovered. A Noahide woman is allowed to have her hair uncovered, but it is considered pious to have her hair covered. This is talking about a married Noahide woman. It is permitted, but it's considered that a pious Noahide woman would have her hair covered. Where is this applicable to Noahide women? Like we get that there's a lot of laws for Jews, but why are we sort of broadly taking a lot of these laws and saying, oh, and a Noahide woman also has to cover her collarbone and her elbows and her knees. And if you want to be pious, your hair. If you want to be pious, wear a skirt and not pants. So where does this come under the second laws? Where are these laws? So it's not surprising under the prohibition of immorality, right? So there's one of the 7 laws is not to be immoral. under that, as a subcategory of that, every woman, every Noahide woman, also every Jewish woman, is obligated to act and dress in a modest way that would not cause others to sin through her acting or dressing in a way that could bring them to sinful thoughts and sinful actions. There's a verse in Leviticus, you should not put a stumbling block before the blind. And a Noahide man has a number of obligations, and dressing inappropriately could bring them to sin. And doing so would be your sin. There's an interesting source for this in terms of Noahide women, in terms of non-Jewish women. It's very interesting when the sages discuss the generation that experienced the great flood, as we call it in Hebrew, the Mabul, Noah, right? The father of all Noahides, Noah. So the women of that generation, the sages say, this sounds very extreme, but this is recorded, says they used to walk around revealing what was below their waist, revealed below their waist, like from the waist and up they were covered, and from the waist and down, not really. And that's why they were punished by the flood. Now, because they did this, they incited men to kidnap them, to abuse them, to do various other transgressions. So you could say, well, these women were victims. These women aren't doing these things. These men are doing the things. But it says that no, their actions and dress made them partners in the sins that were perpetrated. Because when you're walking around naked, you're arousing the desires of the men, and then horrible things happen that you didn't mean, but you sort of created, or definitely considered, partnered in. I know it's very difficult to imagine, but again, there's a lot of things that people wear that we would find difficult to imagine, except we live here and we've seen it, even in styles. I have seen this in myself, where, every once in a while they come up with some other just crazy style. And the first few times you see it, you're just like, what? You're trying to wrap your brain around, what are these people wearing? What are they thinking? But if you see it, for some of us 5 times, for some of us 500 times, it might be something you want to wear, but it just becomes normal. I mean, there's so many examples. Imagine going into a store and buying pants that are already ripped. Like, my kids ripped them. What are you pre-ripping them for? Well, that's a look. That's a style. And it's just a silly example, just randomly. There's so many examples far worse. We're like, what? But since we see them enough, we just accept it. So in those days, for some reason, that was what they thought was a really cool way to walk around. And then they, of course, suffered because of it. They didn't want that to happen. But it says when you walk around naked, and then this is what happens, the man's totally at fault. But you're also considered a partner in the sin, because you're instigating him because of what you're doing. So my point being, that's not talking about Jewish women. Obviously, there's no Jewish woman at that point. Let's talk about women. Talking about the obligation of women to be modest and not dress in a way that will be provocative to a man. So any woman above 12 should wear modest clothing that cover her whole torso until her collarbone, her legs until her knees, and her arms until her elbows. Now, basically, of course, as we're saying, this is to be modest, create a modest environment, not to put thoughts in other people's heads, to create a world that's more virtuous and refined. But it's more than that. The significance of modesty is also for men. Men also have laws of modesty. And it's not only to prevent sin, it's also a little more deeply to understand this is the correct expression of respect for God's creation of mankind. God made man in his image. All mankind is made in the image of God. Covering the body shows a fear of God and a respect for mankind, made in his image, as every human being is made in God's image. If we would go to the other extreme and speak about, people being naked or almost naked, I'm sure all of us have seen people that are almost naked in public. It's expressing an attitude of disbelief that there's a God to respect, that God's watching, that man was created in God's image. If people are just walking around as if, like, what's the difference between me and an animal? Animals walk around naked, me too. Animals are shameless in their nakedness, me too. It's considered very, very animalistic behavior, even again in a situation where it has nothing to do with being provocative to another person. Nothing to do with that. It's still considered like you're not being respectful to God. You're not being respectful to God who is with you. You're not being respectful to your body made in God's image, and therefore not being respectful for God that he gifted you with a body made in his image, and that this is how you're treating it. And it's actually interesting that a lot of these things in previous generations, Noahide women did. Non-Jewish women did. There was definitely in the world a higher level of modesty. I don't think everyone was perfectly modest, but even like the idea of covering your hair in the times of the Talmud, when it discusses Gentile women, it definitely was something that Gentile women did as Jewish women did. Again, it's not the custom of women today, but it still says modest and pious married women should cover their hair, which obviously is definitely a challenge. Definitely could be a challenge, but knowing that God is saying this is, modest, pious, it's something to strive for. So again, not trying to put too many details, but just these basic ideas. Does it give anyone insight into an area they could strive? Again, of course, modesty, as we're saying, also could be in your speech, could be in what you allow in your thoughts, could be allowed in what you watch and what you read to screen it that it's of modest content. Could be in your word choice, could be in your discussion choice, could be in how you discuss things, and definitely, of course, could be in your dress, which is what we were focusing on tonight. Anyone from this have a certain vision of what they could work on to come closer to God in this area? Because as we're saying, both this is keeping his laws, it's helping any men in your life keep his laws, and it's keeping God's presence in your home, and it's showing respect to God, who is there and who gave you this gift of a body in his image. If anyone could think of how they could apply this to themselves.
I'm kind of brainstorming myself, because when you're talking about like what we watch, what we kind of take in, I'm a history buff and I love learning about history. And sometimes some of that stuff is maybe a little dark, shall we say. History was not always a pleasant time. And so I'm trying to think, I'm like, oh, was that good or bad?
It's not good. So definitely when you have these darkish concepts in your brain, it sort of affects the way you look and affects the way you think of things and affects perspective. Absolutely does. 100%. Maybe that can come, of course, maybe a more refined area. Is she reading something forbidden? Maybe it's not forbidden, but it could be very impactful. Anyone else can see how they could process this in terms of their own journey and what they could do to get closer to God in this very, very significant area? As we're saying, God is saying this is the essence of a woman, the essence of woman, and how we could get closer to God in his vision for us.
I definitely think, like I tend to be like jogging pants or just stuff, just very comfortable clothing, because day to day we homeschool, we're going here, we're going there, and or just like quick jeans and that type of stuff. But I definitely see where I could go and spend more money on clothing or just different things like that would probably help and move more towards modesty and refinement. And because I want to dress, make sure that I always dress, in a way in which, I would hope that my son would marry somebody that would be more modest. So, I definitely see where I could do that.
That's a beautiful idea. Also, as you're dressing in a certain way, you're giving your son a vision of what a woman's supposed to look like. So that's another great point. Absolutely. That's so true. And yeah, it definitely could come down to money. Often there's a lot of beautiful, classy, refined, modest clothing, might not be that comfortable and costs more. Definitely generally costs more. Again, things that are made more cheaply are often more cheap in many ways, and things that are of a higher quality also are more expensive. Absolutely. I remember at one point I decided to lengthen a lot of my skirts that were they were all, covered my knees, but I was like, I could be more generous in covering my knees. Let's put it like that. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is a lot of money. I take it to seamstress a number of skirts, and I was like, okay, guys, this is for you. This is my gift to you. So the money you're spending on clothing that's more expensive and more modest is your gift to God, giving that money to God. And definitely I understand the idea of comfort. A lot of people, so many people go there and like, I'm not trying to be provocative. Don't try to not look provocative at all. I just want to be comfortable. But again, God wants refinement. God wants dignity. God wants modesty. It might not always jive with America's version of comfort. It really might not. I mean, you can find things that are, but not always, or not as comfortable. Anyone else can see how this would be applicable to them in their life?
Yes, of course. I need to work on clothing.
Clothing. Okay. So you could think of maybe one specific area. I spoke about, neckline, elbows, knees, not form-fitting, not flashy. I mean, get into it. Of course, there's many levels in clothing to be modest. You don't want to be like in something neon, covering everything in like this neon purple or pink or green, or tight, skin tight, covering everything. So maybe you could think of one specific area, Ruth, of like, oh, that maybe I'll just try to target that. Sometimes people like weave through their closets and like take 3 outfits that you're gonna discard. Those 3 just go away.
Well, I'm like the person just spoke about, leggings, and I love that clothes. So I guess I have to. I seen many Jewish women that they still wear leggings, but they wear something long on top, so that should be okay, right?
Right. Yeah, they wear leggings.
Not as long as I don't wear a short top.
Right.
It should be okay.
They wear leggings and they wear a skirt that covers their knees over it.
Okay. So I need to work on that.
Sure.
Hey, so my other thing is like pajamas. It is very hard to find, and I have been looking pajamas that are like loose fitting, like pajama bottoms, and then like a shirt that actually covers your collarbone. Because I mean, I'm wearing like Target t-shirts that, like the little t-shirts that cover, that
But you
have the
can
round.
Google modest nightwear and see what you come up with. I Googled modest nightwear for myself because I wanted modest nightgowns. And I tried to find modest nightgowns. And that's what I Googled. And I found, actually, I was very surprised. Some religious brands came up. One came up on Amazon, or clearly, I mean, they didn't say anything. It was very clearly, this is from an Orthodox person. Some of them were quite pricey. So I bought the one that was actually, very good price. And I got 2 of them. And they were modest, but they were not very comfortable. You don't want to go to sleep with something not comfortable. And then my daughter said, well, you got some dresses. I had like sort of dresses that would be far more comfortable. And I just could make them nightwear instead of keeping them as dresses. And I did that. And that was like a very economical, and it worked, and it's completely modest and comfortable. But that is what I Googled, like modest nightwear, and a number of, not all religious, but definitely it was very obvious to me, religious sources came up that were definitely modest. But yeah, again, these things are definitely going to be more expensive than Target. They will. And again, you just have to sort of think of it like, okay, God, I'm not into wasting money, and I'm not into putting money into clothing, but I'm putting this money into clothing for you, because this is how you want me to dress. And in your world today, Modest clothing, unsurprising, is of a higher quality, and therefore it has a higher price tag, and you're not going to get it in Target. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Unfortunately so.
Yes, unfortunately so. Unfortunately so. But absolutely so. Then you just build up your wardrobe. Or like I'm saying, you start by, like, say, weeding out 3 items and say, okay, maybe in 3 weeks I'll weed out another 3 items. You know, just keep weeding out what you know is wrong. And like eventually you'll just have to buy something, because whatever's left is going to go, there might not be enough left.
And I'm going to go to Kohl's, like Danielle said, because I have to feel the fabric, because, you know, and that's why I don't like ordering stuff online sometimes, because it's like I can't feel it, you know, because I get like all itchy and stuff if it's not, you know.
And Christelle, add like a shell on the top. That's the hardest part for me, is the tops.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm very
I'm
heavy
wearing one
chested,
right
and so
now.
the tops. Yeah.
I always wear a shell underneath it, even though
Yep. Exactly.
even though if you actually look, you can't even probably see the shell,
I
because
can't
this
see
is
it.
officially a perfect collar line. But I
Yes.
always find that perfect collar lines are not perfect. So I just like automatically wear a shell underneath it. Just in the winter, who cares, for sure. And even in the summer, just wear a shell underneath. It's fine. And you'll see it or you won't see it. But I've just noticed that a lot of perfect, you know, collars sometimes just become not so perfect.
Yes. Okay.
See,
But
for me,
it's-
I was one, you get you can find some good stuff at Etsy. 2, if you find a good website like the Calypso one for the swimsuits, you just wait, or like get on their mailing list and wait for stuff to go on sale. Like their swimsuits are really expensive, so I just wait for stuff to go on clearance and then I buy them.
That's great. Thus speaks a shopper. I'm not a shopper. If I ever look for anything, I absolutely need it then, because I only look if I absolutely need. But that's a very wise idea. You just get on these expensive mailing lists and then just wait. Anyone else see something they could take from this, how they could apply it to their life? As we said, it could be in your thoughts, it could be in what you read, it could be in what you watch, it could be in the topics you talk about, it could be in the word choice, it could be in your dress. Well, if you didn't find something practical that you can take away from this very practical class, maybe afterwards sort of let it mull in your mind and try to think, this is something God really wants from me. This is helping me be a real woman as God wants a woman to be. So if I want to be God's woman, if I want to be a woman as God is envisioning a woman, what can I do in this area to give more to God?